Now to our interview with House Speaker Mike Johnson. Speaker, after a late night and an early morning, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Great to be with you.
Okay, so let's start here. The House Ethics Committee has been investigating one of President Trump's nominees, former Congressman now, Matt Gaetz, up for Attorney General. And they say that their Friday meeting was postponed, not canceled, but it doesn't look like that report that may have come from them is going to be released. Democrat Congressman Glenn Ivey sits on that ethics committee. Here's what he says about us ever seeing that report.
There's precedent for that. Can't really get into what's going on now, but the fact that someone has left the Congress does not mean that the report can't be released for additional information for that matter.
So you know our intrepid Chad Pergram, congressional correspondent. He says that there are at least 2 times a report has been released after a member left Congress. Why be against the transparency? And listen, this report may clear him. I mean, for somebody who's going to be the top federal law enforcement officer in this country.
Yeah, so I don't know anything about the contents of the report because the way the rules work, of course, the Speaker of the House can't put a thumb on the scale or be involved in an ethics committee report. What I do know is that the comments about this being there's a precedent for releasing reports is not exactly accurate. Yeah, there are 2 breaches of the tradition in the past under very extraordinary circumstances. I don't think this meets that criteria. Look, Matt Gaetz is a colleague of mine. We've been serving together for more than 8 years. He's one of the brightest minds in Washington or anywhere for that matter, and he knows everything about how the Department of Justice has been weaponized and misused, and he will be a reformer, and I think that's why the establishment in Washington is so shaken up about this pick. But with regard to the report, there's a very important reason for the tradition and the rule that we have almost always followed, and that is that we don't issue investigations and ethics reports on people who are not members of Congress. I'm afraid that that would open a Pandora's box because the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee is limited to those who are serving in the institution. That's its very purpose, and I think this would be a breach of protocol that could be dangerous for us going forward in the future.
So his nomination will obviously have to go through the Senate the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that's going to be a long process. Our next guest coming up, Senator Chris Coons, is part of that committee. He says the report should be released, but he's not the only one. It's not just Democrats. Here's Republican Senator John Cornyn.
I think there should not be any limitation on the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigation, including whatever the House Ethics Committee has generated.
Do you want to see it?
Absolutely.
He's open to issuing a subpoena to the House Ethics Committee. How do you see this playing out?
Well, look, I hope that the Ethics Committee will stick by our tradition and protocol for the reasons I just articulated. I think this would take us down a path where I don't know how we'd return if the House Ethics Committee and its resources, which are significant, substantial, could be used to investigate people who are not in the House, then where would that end? I mean, people could weaponize that function of government as well. The reason that Matt Gaetz is such an exciting pick to so many people is because he will go in and reform the Department of Justice. It desperately needs it. Look, he and I sat on the Judiciary Committee together for almost 7 years before I became Speaker of the House, and we heard the evidence. We saw the evidence of lawfare. We saw how the Department of Justice had been used for political purposes, how they targeted Catholics in some examples and parents at school boards and pro-life Americans. This is not what our system of justice was built to do, and Matt Gaetz will go in there and shake it up. And I think most of the American people understand that's an important function.
Well, to be fair, he was a member when the investigation was underway. We'll see now how the battle maybe between the Senate and the House sides play out as he proceeds in the confirmation process. In the meantime, President Trump has made it clear if his nominees get stuck, he wants the Senate to move ahead and possibly the House cooperating with this idea of recess appointments. Forbes says this, that lawmakers in both the House and Senate would have to agree for the Senate to adjourn for more than 10 days as the Constitution requires both chambers to agree in order to adjourn for more than 3 days. So there'd have to be House and Senate action. National Review says this about your role in that. It says the very idea that the Speaker of the House would collude with the president to undermine the Senate's constitutional role and effectively make the legislative branch a passive plaything of the executive should outrage any member of Congress. Would you take steps to put things into recess so those appointments could happen?
Listen, I believe in the principle of a new president being able to choose his team, and that used to not be a controversial notion. We're in a time of very divided government and a very partisan atmosphere in Washington. I wish it were not. I wish the Senate would simply do its job of advice and consent and allow the president to put the persons in his cabinet of his choosing. But if this thing bogs down, it would be a great detriment to the country, to the American people. Remember, they just delivered a mandate to the president, an overwhelming popular vote victory and of course, electoral college victory. And they have sent the message that America First policies should be the rule of the day. So the persons that the president is choosing will help with that agenda. They will take their leadership in these agencies and they will reform them as the people expect and demand. So we'll evaluate all that at the appropriate time and we'll make the appropriate decision. There may be a function for that, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
Okay. You've had a specialty as a constitutional lawyer. I knew you for years in that role before you proceeded into what you're doing now. Here is the Wall Street Journal editorial board on the constitutionality of these recess appointments. They say it's unconstitutional, anti-constitutional. It would eliminate one of the basic checks on power that the founders built into the American system of government. If Mr. Trump gets away with it, the next Democrat to win the Oval Office would whoop through left-wing nominees, and whoever holds the presidency would gain unilateral power to name cranks and cronies to offices of immense authority. You talked about opening a Pandora's box by going against tradition earlier in the show. Isn't that what this would do? Would you worry about a Democrat president installing whomever he or she wanted without the restrictions of the Senate confirmation process?
Look, I've been a jealous guardian of the Constitution my entire life, and it was my career before I came to Congress, and I've demonstrated over and over that we will have fidelity to our oath, which is to uphold the Constitution. So we evaluate all these things very carefully. I'm sympathetic to all these arguments. As I said, we'll have to see how this develops. I am very hopeful that the Senate will do its job, and that is provide its advice and consent and move these nominees along. They have an obligation to do a vetting of every nominee, and they will. And we'll see how this plays out. But I think all the hyperbole and everything on the front end here is to distract the American people and to try to stall President Trump in delivering upon that mandate again that the people have given him. I know he's excited to get to work. I spent all day yesterday with him at Mar-a-Lago, a long day of hard work, and then we ultimately had a little fun at the UFC fight late last night. He is in a good place. He is ready to govern, and the people that he is choosing are ready to do the same. And I think that's going to be a good thing for the country.
Okay, we know you've got a big agenda ahead, but first in this lame duck session, you got to figure out funding the government. We run out of money at the federal level on December 20th, or at least in part. So what is the plan? A short-term measure, a long-term effort? I know you have wanted to get all of the appropriations bills passed. Is it possible to do that? What do we do come that cliff?
Well, it's getting more and more difficult to get all of those bills done. And here's the reason why. The House has done its work. The Senate has not. Chuck Schumer is still the Democrat leader there in the Senate, and he has refused to put a single appropriations bill on the floor. That's not how the process is supposed to work, so it's broken down in that regard. So we're running out of clock. December 20th is the deadline. We're still hopeful that we might be able to get that done. But if not, we'll have a temporary measure, I think, that would go into the first part of next year and allow us the necessary time to get this done. And I think that would be ultimately a good move because the country would benefit from it, because then you'd have Republican control and we'd have a little more say in what those spending bills are. But the new reform agenda begins in earnest as soon as President Donald J. Trump takes the office in January, and we have a full agenda to run. It's going to be a very aggressive first 100 days of the new Congress, and we've gotten all the members of Congress ready for that. The House has been preparing for this for almost a year, and now the Senate, under its new leadership, Leader-elect Thune, he and I met this week. We talked about this aggressive agenda, and he told me he is ready to go and deliver on that America First, those America First policies. So it'll be a very busy time for Congress and a good time for the country.
Well, we know you've got the majority again in the House. We'll wait to see how those last few seats settle out and watch as the agenda gears up for January. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time. Always good to have you.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.